It is a Saturday morning in late May. You are kneeling on the concrete of your driveway, the warm sun already beating down on your neck. In your hand is an old flathead screwdriver, and you are gouging at the thick green weeds, pushing up through the expansion joints. Your knuckles are scraped. Your lower back aches. Next week you will drive to the hardware store and spend $25 on a plastic jug of chemical weed killer. You will spray it. The weeds will wither. You will think you have finally won. But 3 weeks later, they will be back, taller and thicker than before. You are trapped in an endless, frustrating loop of pulling, spraying, paying, and kneeling. Now I want you to sit with this. The reason you are losing the fight against the weeds in your yard and your driveway is not because you are not working hard enough. It is because you have been taught to fight them the wrong way. You have been sold a policy of scorched earth, a war against the soil itself, when what you actually need is to heal the soil's immune system. My name is Daniel Yoder. I am Amish and I farm in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. My grandfather cleared parts of this very land with a team of draft horses, and my father worked the same soil until his hands were as rough as the hickory handle of his favorite hoe. Today, my wife Rebecca grows a half-acre of vegetables and flowers that feed our 7 children. And our pasture grass stays thick and green, long into the late summer heat. We do not buy jugs of toxic chemicals to pour onto the ground, where our children run barefoot. We do not spend our Saturdays gouging at the concrete until our knuckles bleed. Today, I am going to show you how the careful people of my community handle weeds. I am going to walk you through 2 completely different methods for 2 completely different problems. One for the cracks in your hard concrete, and one for the soft earth of your lawn and garden. I am going to explain to you why pulling weeds by hand is often making your problem twice as bad. And I am going to show you how a harmless byproduct of the corn harvest and a simple kettle of hot water from your kitchen stove can stop weeds from ever coming back. And I will be honest with you the entire way through. I will tell you what works, what takes patience, and why the pest control industry is perfectly happy watching you destroy the health of your own yard. Stay with me. By the end of this, you will look at the earth around your house with new eyes, and you will never need to buy another plastic jug of poison again. Let me start by telling you the truth about pulling weeds by hand, because this is a hard thing for a diligent homeowner to accept. When you see a dandelion proudly standing in the middle of your green lawn, your first instinct is to grab it by the leaves and pull. You pull, the leaves snap off in your hand, and you throw them in the compost bucket, feeling a sense of deep satisfaction. But beneath the dark surface of the soil, you have just made a terrible mistake. A dandelion has a thick, fleshy taproot that can reach down a full foot into the earth. When you pull the top off, that root remains safely anchored below, and nature is remarkably stubborn. From that broken, bruised root, the plant will push up 2 or 3 new shoots. By next week, instead of one dandelion, you have a hydra-headed monster growing back thicker than before. The same is true for the invasive vines, like creeping Charlie or crabgrass. When you rake them aggressively, or try to tear them out, the runners snap. Every tiny piece of stem left behind in the dirt grows a new root system. You are not removing the weeds. You are pruning them, multiplying them, and replanting them across your yard. So, if pulling them makes it worse, what does the modern world tell you to do? They tell you to go to the store and buy a chemical. They sell you products with long names: glyphosate, 2,4-D, pre-emergent synthetic herbicides. You spray this chemical across your lawn and down into the cracks of your patio. The weeds die, but let me tell you what else dies. The earthworms die. The microscopic bacteria and fungi that live in healthy topsoil die. The entire living, breathing ecosystem beneath the grass blades is choked out by the poison. You are executing a scorched earth policy on your own property. And here is the quiet tragedy of that choice. Weeds are nature's scabs. They are the tough pioneer plants that rush in to cover bare, sick, or damaged soil. When you use harsh chemicals, you turn your rich topsoil into dead dirt. Your good grass weakens, thins out, and leaves bare patches. And what rushes into bare, dead dirt faster than anything else? Weeds. The industry sells you a poison that weakens your soil, which invites more weeds, which requires you to buy more poison next season. And when your grass starts to fail, they are standing right there, ready to sell you bags of synthetic, petroleum-based fertilizer to artificially prop up the dead ground. It is an endless, profitable treadmill, and you are the one doing all the running while they collect the money. We do not fight the earth. We build the soil's immune system. Healthy, thick grass growing in rich living soil is the ultimate weed killer. It literally chokes out the space, the sunlight, and the water that a weed seed needs to sprout. But to get there, you need to transition away from the poison. Before I show you the true methods, I must stop and address a very popular myth that is floating around the internet, because I have seen it ruin good property. People will tell you to mix white vinegar, table salt, and dish soap in a spray bottle and spray it into the cracks of your driveway and patio. My English neighbor, a fine man named John, who lives just down the lane from us, tried this 2 summers ago. He was so proud to show me how the weeds shriveled up. But let me tell you the chemistry of what he actually did, and why he deeply regretted it by the next spring. Concrete and cement are highly alkaline materials. Vinegar is acetic acid. When you spray acid onto concrete, it immediately begins to eat away the cement paste that holds the sand and gravel together. And salt is even worse. Salt works its way deep into the porous concrete. When the winter comes, the salt causes the moisture inside the concrete to freeze and thaw violently, resulting in a condition called spalling. The surface of the concrete begins to pop off in sharp, jagged flakes. John saved $20 on weed killer, but he caused thousands of dollars in permanent damage to his driveway. The concrete crumbled away at the expansion joints, leaving wide, ugly gaps that only invited more dirt and more weeds. Never put acid and salt on your expensive hardscaping. There is a far better, far cheaper way that harms nothing. Let us start with method 1, the concrete and patio solution. This is for the weeds, growing in your driveway joints, the cracks in your sidewalks, and between the paving stones of your patio. It requires only water from your kitchen and a bag of fine sand. First, put a large kettle of water on your kitchen stove and bring it to a hard, rolling boil. You want it violently bubbling. Carefully carry that kettle out to the driveway. Please, wear long pants and closed-toe leather boots and keep the children and the dogs well away. Boiling water demands profound respect. Walk over to the expansion joint, filled with weeds, and slowly, deliberately, pour the boiling water directly over the crown of the plant. Do not just splash it. Pour it steadily so that the scalding water seeps down into the crack, soaking the soil and the hidden root system. Here is the science of why this is devastating to the weed. You are inducing massive thermal shock. When 212-degree water hits the leaves and the stem, it instantly cooks the plant proteins and ruptures the cell walls. It literally melts the plant from the inside out. Because water is a liquid, it follows the exact path of the root, carrying that lethal heat all the way down into the dark where the root hides. Within a few hours, you will see the green leaves turn a sickly dark green and lay flat against the concrete. By the next morning, they will be shriveled, brown, and entirely dead, cooked down to the very tips of their roots. No chemicals, no toxic runoff, just the pure physics of heat. Once the weeds are dead and dried out, take an old stiff bristled brush or a crevice tool and easily sweep the dead organic matter out of the crack. Now you must perform the second half of the job, or the wind will simply blow new dirt and new seeds right back into the gap. you must lock the door. Go to the hardware store and buy a bag of either polymeric sand or fine mason sand. It costs just a few dollars. Pour the dry sand directly over the expansion joints and use a broom to sweep it down deep into the cracks. Pack it in as tightly as you can, sweeping away the excess from the surface. If you use polymeric sand, which has a natural binding agent in it, you will then take your garden hose and set it to a very fine, gentle mist. Lightly mist the sand in the cracks. Do not wash it away, just dampen it. As it dries, it will cure and harden almost like a flexible rubber. If you use plain mason sand, it will simply pack tight. What you have just done is deprive the crack of light and space. Water will still be able to drain away, but a weed seed blowing in on the autumn wind will find no open dirt to land in, and no sunlight to reach it if it tries to sprout. You have sealed the breach, naturally and permanently. Now let us move to method 2, the lawn and garden bed solution. You cannot pour boiling water on your lawn, or you will kill the grass. You cannot pack sand into your garden beds. For the soft earth, we use something brilliant. Something discovered by agricultural researchers, but quickly buried by the chemical companies. Because it cannot be patented and sold for a massive markup. It is called corn gluten meal. Corn gluten meal is a natural byproduct of the corn milling process. It is a fine, yellow powder that smells faintly of the autumn harvest. To a human, a dog, or a barn cat, it is completely harmless. My children could eat a spoonful of it and suffer nothing more than a dry mouth. But to a weed seed, it is an absolute wall of defense. Corn gluten meal contains natural dipeptides that work as a powerful organic pre-emergent. When a dandelion seed or a crabgrass seed wakes up in the damp spring earth and cracks open, it tries to send out tiny, microscopic, white hair roots to drink water from the soil. When those delicate new roots touch the corn gluten meal, the dipeptides immediately dry them out. The root hairs shrivel up and die. The seed, having used all its stored energy to sprout, suddenly finds it cannot drink a single drop of water. It dies of thirst before it ever breaks the surface of the soil. The weed is eliminated from existence before you ever see a green leaf. But the brilliance of corn gluten meal does not stop there. It only harms seeds as they are germinating. It does absolutely no harm to plants that already have established root systems. It will not hurt your mature grass, your rose bushes, your tomato plants, or your oak trees. In fact, it does exactly the opposite. Corn gluten meal is roughly 10% nitrogen by weight. Nitrogen is the primary nutrient that grass needs to grow thick, dark green, and vibrant. So, as the corn gluten meal sits on the soil, it slowly breaks down, acting as a slow-release organic fertilizer. It feeds your lawn while simultaneously suffocating the weed seeds. Your grass grows thicker and stronger, expanding its own root system and shading out the soil beneath it, further building the immune system of your yard. Here is exactly how you apply it, step by step, because timing and moisture are the keys to making it work. Step 1, timing is everything. You must apply corn gluten meal before the weed seeds germinate. In most of the country, this means a few weeks before the last frost of the spring, usually around the time the bright yellow forsythia bushes begin to bloom in your neighborhood. You will do a second application in the early fall to stop the winter weeds from sprouting. Step 2, mow your lawn to a normal height and rake up any heavy debris or dead leaves so that the powder can reach the actual surface of the soil. Step 3, go to the farm supply store, garden center, or feed mill and buy bags of corn gluten meal. Ensure the bag says corn gluten meal and not just cracked corn or cornmeal, as those do not have the right protein concentration. It usually comes in a granular or pelletized form for easy spreading. You will load it into an ordinary broadcast spreader, the same kind you use for grass seed. Step 4. Walk your yard and spread the material evenly at a rate of about 20 pounds per 1,000 square feet. You want a good, visible dusting over the soil. Do the same by hand in the bare dirt of your flower beds and around your vegetable garden. Step 5. The activation. For corn gluten meal to release its barrier, it needs to be watered in. If rain is not in the forecast, get out your hose and water the yard thoroughly. You want to soak the ground so the powder melts down into the top layer of the dirt. Step 6. The dry period. This is the crucial part. After that initial watering, you must let the area dry out for a few days. The dipeptides need a dry period to effectively desiccate the newly forming weed roots. If it rains continuously for 2 weeks after you apply it, the seeds might find enough moisture to survive, despite the barrier. This is farming, and we are always somewhat at the mercy of the sky, but a few dry days will set the trap perfectly. Now I am going to give you the honest word, because I promised I would never sell you a miracle that isn't real. Corn gluten meal is a pre-emergent. It prevents new weeds from being born. It does absolutely nothing to kill the massive, deep-rooted dandelion that has been sitting in your front yard since last summer. For the mature weeds that are already established, you have to do the manual labor one last time. But you do it the right way. Go to the hardware store and buy a long-handled weeding tool, the kind with a long metal fork at the bottom that resembles a snake's tongue. You push that fork deep into the ground alongside the center of the weed, step on the fulcrum, and pry the entire plant, taproot and all, out of the earth in one solid piece. Do not yank the leaves. Pry the root. If you take one Saturday to properly pry out the existing mature weeds, and then you immediately lay down the corn gluten meal barrier, you have broken the cycle. You have removed the adults, and you have poisoned the nursery against the children. It may take 2 or 3 seasons of applying corn gluten in the spring and fall to exhaust the bank of weed seeds that have been sleeping in your soil for years. But every season, the weeds will be fewer, and the grass will be thicker, greener, and more resilient. You are healing the earth, returning it to a state of robust health where it can defend itself without a drop of toxic poison. I want to take a moment and ask you to reflect on what this means for your home, your family, and your wallet. Think about the chemical companies that package glyphosate and 2,4-D in brightly colored bottles with warning labels, written in tiny print. They sponsor the home improvement shows. They buy the end cap displays at the hardware store. And they generate billions of dollars in revenue by convincing you that the earth is a dirty, flawed thing that requires their chemical warfare to look beautiful. They sell you a dependency. You spray the driveway, the weeds return, and you buy the spray again. But a kettle of hot water? They cannot patent water. They cannot brand a bag of fine sand. They cannot charge you $25 a month for the byproduct of milled corn. There is no massive profit margin in teaching a man how to let the soil heal itself. And because there is no profit in it, the television commercials stay silent. The hardware store clerks push the plastic jugs, and a whole nation of good, hard-working people forget the simple, natural rhythms that kept the farmsteads of my grandparents pristine and productive for over a century. My parents never fought a war against the earth. When we saw weeds taking over a corner of the pasture, my father did not look for a poison. He looked at the soil. He knew the soil was telling him something was wrong, that it was compacted or barren or lacking nutrients. We amended the soil. We sowed strong seed. We spread the natural byproducts of the harvest, and the earth responded by choking out the thistles and the crabgrass on its own. We worked with nature, not against her, because when you fight nature, nature has a lot more time and a lot more patience than you do. You will run out of money and stamina long before she runs out of weeds. You do not need to be an Amish farmer to use these methods. You only need a willingness to step off the treadmill they have sold you. you have everything you need in your kitchen and at your local feed store right now. So here is what I want you to do this weekend. Leave the chemical sprays on the shelf. If you have a driveway or a patio that is overgrown and unsightly, put a kettle of water on the stove. Carry it carefully outside and cook those weeds down to the root. Let them dry out, sweep them away, and spend $5 on a bag of sand to lock the cracks shut for good. Then drive to the farm supply store. Ask the man behind the counter for a bag of corn gluten meal. Bring it home and spread it across the bare dirt of your flower beds, your vegetable borders, and the lawn where the children play. Water it in and let it go to work. Let it stop the next generation of weeds before they ever see the sun, while it feeds the deep green roots of your grass. You will have spent perhaps $20 total. You will have protected the earthworms, the honeybees, and the groundwater. And you will have taken back control of your own land from the companies that profit off your frustration. Tell me in the comments below, what is the most stubborn weed you are fighting right now? Is it the deep-rooted dandelion, the creeping Charlie that wraps around your flowers, or the stubborn crabgrass that ruins the lawn? Share your struggles, and tell me if you have ever tried to pry the roots out whole, or if you have been stuck in the cycle of pulling and snapping the leaves. I read every single one of these comments, and the stories you share about your own yards teach everyone else reading them. Next time, since we have been speaking of the garden and the things that try to take it over, I am going to show you the old way my grandmother protected her cabbages and her leafy greens from the slugs that come out in the dark. We do not use toxic slug pellets that can poison the barn cats or the birds. We use the lid of a glass jar and a few drops of something cheap from the kitchen pantry that draws every slug in the garden to it overnight. You will not believe how simple it is, but it works flawlessly, and it has saved our harvest for generations. It is the natural next step to protecting the healthy soil you are building today. Until then, boil the kettle, sweep the sand, feed the soil, and remember, the people who built this country with their hands knew things we are only just starting to remember.